Hi, everyone. So a lot of you had a lot of questions on this case assignment and syntax trees, and this lecture or like this video is intended for those of you who already understand how to do syntax trees with the tree. I won't be really explaining the basics of case assignment, like what the hell case assignment is. This is really focused on how to do case assignment without the tree given to you. Like, what if they just give you the sentence on the exam and you have to deconstruct what the answer is? And just to clarify, what the exam will ask you for is what all the case assigners are. What are all the things that can assign case? Then it'll ask you for all the case assignees, all the things that need case to be assigned to them. And then it'll ask you what is assigning case to what. So those are the three things that you should be trying to get out of these sentences. I just wanted to start off by saying, in general, I've been recommending that people make this little cheat sheet for themselves. I know it's a lot of text. So I'm just going to take a moment to go through all of this. Verb, prepositions, and infinitive verbs all assign accusative case, which means that it's the object case, which means that you use pronouns him and her. All tenses assign nominative case, which means that you're assigning as the subject of the sentence, and that uses she and he pronouns. There are a couple special cases that will come into play, and this is something really important to keep in mind, both if you see the tree and if you don't have the tree. These special cases, which I am going to make easier for you to read, if it's a passive verb, you cannot assign case from the verb itself, but they do have a tense, so you can extract a tense from this verb. Infinitive verbs, on the other hand, are kind of the opposite, where the verb itself can assign case, but there is no tense that you can extract from it. And I understand it might be a little confusing to hear right now, but I'm sure when you take a look at the tree, it'll make a little more sense. So let's just take this example. I obviously have to start with the trees first, just to make sure we all are on the same page. Of course, it won't be as detailed as I mentioned. Please see the other video if you want a detailed explanation. So given this sentence here, which let's reconstruct it back into English, it was thought Jill was a Yale student. That's the sentence this one is talking about here. The first thing you should be doing is kind of deconstructing what the critical tenses are, or what all the possible case assigners are. So just making sure to add in all the tenses, because remember, you don't have the tree for this. So it passed, it's past tense, right? Was thought is past tense. Was thought. This is where I'd like to mark whether it's infinitive verb or if it's a passive verb, because remember, those are special cases. So it's important to mark those. I just put passive. If you're on a pen and paper, it's much easier for you to put the passive elsewhere on it, maybe like just draw it on top or something, but I don't have that option, so it's going to go on the side. Jill was a Yale student, so was is also past tense. A Yale student. Okay. What are all the noun phrases? That's the first thing I would do, because you want to know all of the case assignees, all the things that need case. Those are the noun phrases. So it, Jill, and a Yale student. Keep in mind, a Yale student is the whole noun phrase, not just Yale student. You have to include the a with the noun phrase. Okay, so even beyond this, now let's get all of the case assigners, all of the things that can assign case. So we have past, the other past, and was. You might be thinking, Cam, why the hell did you not take the was thought? And to that answer, I'd like to say, look at your cheat sheet that you have. If it's passive, you cannot assign case. So let's just imagine it doesn't exist. In fact, if you have this option, just delete it from the sentence. So now we have this element left. Now, one of the key things I need you to know to be able to figure out how to do this without the trees on the page is we need to look at the tree to understand what I'm even talking about. As you may notice, the tense is always separated from the verb phrase, right? We separated out the tense. For some reason, tense doesn't end up as one of the daughter nodes of this verb phrase. It's the sister node of the verb phrase instead. And as a result, tense is a tier higher than the verb itself. This is something to keep in mind. Tense is a tier higher than the verb itself. You might call it the uncle or something like that. And this affects it because the verb, as a result, cannot assign case to things that come before it. If you think about it, if tense is always separating out, then the verb here cannot assign case to something that's way over here. And you can see it right here. This verb, even if it wasn't a passive, let's assume it's a regular verb. This verb cannot govern the noun phrase over here because it's on a tier lower. So this is something to keep in mind then. As we move into the sentence, as soon as you see a verb, you should be like, okay, there is like a mental separation that you need to construct. You can put a manual thing there, but for me, I just like know it. There's a separation between was and past. So if I was to ask you, can was assign case to Jill? The answer is no, it can't assign case to Jill because we know now that mentally they're on a separate level of the syntax tree. And so as a result, let's just figure out what was can assign case to. Was can assign case to a Yale student because even though tense and verb are on a separate thing, verb can still govern the stuff after it. And the stuff after it in this case is a Yale student. So let's group those together. You can use whatever symbol you want. I'm just using brackets. All right, that makes life easy. In general, one of the things you want to keep in mind is you want to stay pretty close to your case assignee. Whatever's assigning case, like you probably want to stay pretty close because why would you go so far away if there's something right next to you? And so take this noun phrase, it, what's the closest thing to it? Past. So let's just group those together. Assume that they assign case, we'll double check this afterwards. And then Jill and past are the only thing left. Are they on the same level? Think about it. Yes, tense and the noun phrase tend to be on the same level because the verb, it's not a verb. The verb goes down, but the tense stays up there, right? So you're like, all right, good. Let me just group those together. And another key thing is like, if you really want to know what's, I don't know if this exam will ask you this question, but tense, if you take a look at your cheat sheet up here, tense assigns nominative case, assigning subject case. So use he, she. Let's double check our answers. If I did he, I can't do he, but normally if it's like Jack or Jill, you can replace it with pronoun to check whether or not it's correct. But anyway, so past tense assigns nominative case. So nominative case is being assigned to it. And since past is also assigning nominative case to Jill, Jill's also a subject. And then was a Yale student. Was is a verb. And if you take a look at your cheat sheet here, verbs, prepositions, and infinitive verbs assign accusative case. So it's an object / him / her. That's what you would use to if you had to replace it. And so yeah, that's all of the case assignees, case assigners. Let's move on to a couple special cases. I covered one of them now with the passives, but what about infinitive verbs that I keep bringing up? Let's take a look. So now we have this sentence, Jack believed Jill. I assume that they'll give you a word. Jack believed Jill to be a Yale student. Infinitive verb is detected because you're like, oh boy, I see a to eat, to sleep, to die, to be. Those are infinitive verbs, right? So you're like, all right, great. This is how I'd mark it. I'd mark it with infinitive. Now let's try to go back in and add in all of those tenses because that's important. Jack believed is in past tense. Jill to be. This is where infinitives matter because if it wasn't an infinitive, we could separate out the tense of present tense. But infinitives don't get tense. They as you can even see on this tree above, though I wasn't looking at it until now, to kind of takes the spot of the tense. There's like no space for present tense to appear. So as a result, you don't get tense. And it's just an infinitive verb, a Yale student. So now let's break this down a little bit further and start grouping. All of our case assignees are Jack, Jill, a Yale student, just like before. And all of our case assigners are past, be, believed. Sorry for jumping around. verbs and tenses can assign case, right? Anyway, so let's group. First things first, I just see like Jack and past. It's just so easy to do off the bat because I know that tenses in general are going to be on the same level as the noun. And since it's the beginning of the sentence, nothing crazy can happen at the beginning of the sentence yet. So I know that they're on the same level. Believed Jill to be a Yale student. Now we're on Jill. Jill's a little bit tricky because you're like, all right, believed is a verb. So it should be able to assign case to Jill. And you're like, all right, to be, infinitives. Infinitives can also assign case. However, one critical thing to note is that even though there's no tense node, the idea is that verbs are tiered down, right? So you have to remember, you're like, oh boy, I can't have infinitive govern Jill. I can't have be govern Jill because it's a tier below it. And actually you see this in the chart itself. You can see that noun phrase is up here, but the verb for be is a tier down. So it's not in a governing position. So as a result, you're like, okay, so I can't use be to govern Jill, but I can use believed because they are, even though they're not sister nodes, they are in a governing position. So I'm just going to group those two together. Finally, we're left with to be a Yale student. There's nothing left that can assign case besides be. So that makes our life a little bit easier. You're just like, all right, be a Yale student. Let's confirm that they can govern, just like construct your mental tree, make sure that they're in a governing position. And you're like, yeah, verbs can generally govern the stuff after them as a result of them being a tier down, but they cannot govern the stuff before them. That's just the general idea. Obviously, you'll encounter some more complicated trees maybe. I hope that such complicated trees will not be on the exam, but this is the way I figure out these special sentences with these special cases. Thanks, and hopefully you guys can apply this information on the exam. Hang in there.